I think we'll start now. There are some people who are taking. Do you take Pilates or do you do Pilates? Anyway, they're engaged in Pilates. They will be here.
Stay away from Pilates.
Well, yeah, but they're not staying away from Pilates. They're there. And so a couple of people will come. Jenny Calick expresses her regret. She's ill and would rather not infect anyone. So she decided to just go home after teaching. Thank you very much for coming to our annual Vadim Filatov Memorial Lecture. Vadim Filatov was a student in the class of 1986. Some of his former professors are here. He was a physics major. No, he was neuroscience. He went off to Johns Hopkins Medical School and then went off to Yale and had a brilliant career in ophthalmology. He came to Amherst with his mother, single mother, from Baku, Azerbaijan, moved to New York, went to the Dalton School, and was among the first Russian emigrating young people to enroll at Amherst College. Unfortunately, he was struck down by cancer under the age of 40, left a wife and 3 young boys. The pictures are on that table there if you'd like to have a look. And in his honor, in his memory, some of his classmates, one of whom was here, his old buddy Dmitry Ditsis, set up a fund to honor his memory. And I really think there's no better way to do that than to have an Amherst alumnus come and be with us and give us his talk and his presentation. So welcome. Dylan Schneider is a member of the class of 2006. He came to us from California. He was a double major in music and English. I knew him in and out. One of the most interesting things I thought he did was to serve as an intern one summer for WFCR and John Montanari, and I realized John knew a lot, but a lot of it came from the interns looking up all this. I mean, how does John know all of this stuff? How Dylan was doing it. Dylan left Amherst and went off to the University of Chicago, where he did a Ph.D. in music composition, and he got his Ph.D. more than a year ago. We're in touch, we're out of touch, it's not important, but last December, out of the blue, and luckily I was on sabbatical at the time, Dylan just wrote, and he said, if you want to click, 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 I have this opera, STRIP-TEASE. Dylan, well, let's have a look. And I have to say, it was just a wonderful moment to listen and watch 25 minutes of just excellent music, in my opinion. So I wrote and asked whether Dylan would be available this spring, semester to come, talk about his opera and some projects that he's thinking of, and he graciously agreed to join us. Before he steps up, just a couple of announcements. There's of course, there'll be questions after this talk, presentation. I hope that you will not gravitate toward Dylan to speak further to him when the talk is over, but rather go into the gallery where we do have a very nice reception. And if you have not seen the exhibit, the dynamic spirit of Russian modernism, which is hanging on our walls, I hope you'll do that. We just 2 weeks ago hung the restored huge socialist realist mural of Stalin and Mao signing a peace treaty in 1950 in the Kremlin. That's up, and it's really worth looking at in the gallery. So that's that. Dylan has brought with him some of his, a CD of his music, which he started writing when he was at Amherst. Some of it performed by some fairly excellent groups like the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. STRIP-TEASE is on it. And so if you'd like to, it's minimal cost, if you'd like to have a copy of that CD, Bill McGlory, his classmate, will take care of you at the end of the hour. So without further ado, Dylan, welcome. It's wonderful to see you. And you're in his hands now. In the middle of the talk, I think we'll get ready for the showing of this. Dylan, thank you very much. Nice to see you.
you so much, Stanley. I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Rabinowitz and the Amherst Center for Russian Culture for the exceptional hospitality and wonderful invitation to return to campus and share some of my recent work in opera with you this afternoon. Today I'm going to talk with you primarily about two one-act operas of mine based on literary works by two Slavic writers. One of the operas is called PKHENTZ. Looks like this. It's an adaptation of a short story by Russian writer Andrei Sinyavsky, first published in Poland in 1966. The second opera we'll talk about is STRIP-TEASE, and it's based on a play by Polish dramatist Sławomir Mrożek, which was first premiered in Krakow in 1961. My opera STRIP-TEASE was produced in Chicago in 2013 with musicians comprised of two Grammy Award-winning ensembles and a potpourri of guest performers. And my talk today will be followed by a screening of the piece, which is about 25 minutes long, so I hope you can join us for that. First, however, I do want to be clear that although I am standing here today speaking to you in the supremely beautiful reading room at the Center for Russian Culture, I am not a scholar of Russian or Slavic literature. I am a composer. So why, you may rightly wonder, am I here? Well, this is really a story that begins here at the college, at my very first composition lesson with Professor Lou Scraplin. Lou is now Professor Emeritus, still living in Amherst, and still very active as a composer. Prior to this first composition lesson that I want to tell you about, I had spoken to Lou only once before in my life. I had interviewed him for a news story I was doing as a summer intern at WFCR, Amherst's local NPR affiliate and classical music radio station. Lou Scraplin won the Pulitzer Prize in Music in 2000 for his opera, Life is a Dream. And WFCR wanted me to find out what Lou thought about changes the Pulitzer Prize Committee was making in the way it would award the prize. He really didn't like the changes, but that's a story for another time. So back to my first composition lesson. Lou asked me what I wanted to compose that semester. And I remember I took a moment. I thought about my double major in music and English. I thought about my experience as an actor in my youth. And, well, I thought about Lou's Pulitzer Prize, which I had learned over the summer he had won for an opera. So I said, I'd like to write an opera. Great, said Lou. What's it going to be about? I had to take a longer moment before I answered that one. In addition to being a serious music major, I was also a serious English major, an avid reader, and I had spent a few summers writing and reporting for WFCR and also for NPR at their headquarters in Washington. And I felt I had a certain way with words. So I said to Lou, I'd like to make an adaptation of a literary work. Lou immediately suggested that I take a look at the short stories of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and off I went to Frost Library. I took down the volume of Garcia Marquez's collected stories, and just sort of fell open to a story entitled A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. A very old man with enormous wings. It's a magical image, it's absurd, it's opera. Somehow I just knew that this was going to be my piece. But just to make sure I did read the story. And it really was absurd and magical and full of meaning. We produced my opera at Buckley Recital Hall with a beautiful costume and stage design by Emily Rosenberg, class of 2007, a now longtime collaborator who I'm so delighted can be with us here this afternoon. In my opera, the curtain rises on a decrepit, winged senior citizen of mysterious origins who has just been discovered by a greedy couple. Garcia Marquez describes the old man as speaking in an incomprehensible dialect, which I chose to represent through elaborate, stylized whistling in my score. The couple disregards their neighbor's advice to club the old man to death. Instead, they furnish the sickly creature with temporary room and board in their dung-covered chicken coop. Soon the couple realizes that the old man's otherworldly appearance betrays a robust potential for profit, and the coop is transformed into a carnival exhibition with an admission charge of 5 centimes. Just as business begins to boom, however, a traveling spider-woman, a freakish circus act in her own right, steals away their precious clientele. The story is told through a comical and surreal turn of events, but Garcia Marquez's parable ultimately reveals how greed and superstition blind us to the miracles before our eyes. But still, here I am in the Russian Center, speaking to you about a Gabriel Garcia Marquez opera I wrote as a music and English major. Why, oh why am I here? I promise I will get there. Indeed, things are about to get very Slavic soon. But first, I want to mention that, curiously, all 3 of my operas, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, PKHENTZ, and STRIP-TEASE, share a driving fixation on the body and its parts. We have a man with wings, a vegetable man who we'll meet momentarily, and, yes, STRIP-TEASE, naked men. Furthermore, in all 3 operas, the body becomes a vehicle to expose physical and psychological trauma at the hands of oppressive social forces, staged in surreal and darkly comic circumstances. And speaking of bodies, PKHENTZ, the opera that I'm currently composing, features as its protagonist a seeming hunchback. This character is in fact not a hunchback at all. He's an alien, and also a cactus-like vegetable, forced to conceal his spiny appendages in a hump on his back. Then there's Veronica. She's his neighbor. She's desperately in love with vegetable Andrei, despite his horrifying, disfigured, gluten-free physique. She's very attractive, but, unfortunately, she's human. PKHENTZ is my adaptation of a story by renowned Russian writer and dissident, Andrei Sinyavsky. His works were written during the height of Soviet power, and in part they address the spiritual barbarism and absurdity of life under the regime, although often in the context of absurd or black comedy. At this point, I would like to mention that it was none other than Professor Rabinowitz who recommended that I read PKHENTZ. This was after I had just written the Garcia Marquez opera and was eager to continue exploring my interest in bringing literary absurdism to the operatic stage. In the opera, hunchbacked Andrei Kazimierovich survives. In fact, he is the sole survivor of a crash landing of a spaceship in the Siberian forests, after which he endures a hermetic existence in his squalid Moscow flat. He does earn a small income as a bookkeeper. That's no real life for somebody so widely traveled. An alienated alien, he does not have the wherewithal to return to his planet, called PKHENTZ, which he finds. Ultimately, he will decide to return to the forest and give himself to the elements. But while in Moscow, his only relief from self-imposed isolation is Veronica, the voluptuous beauty I mentioned a few minutes ago. Oddly, however, Andrei finds the prospects of relations with her entirely revolting, even unfathomable. Andrei is an alien and a cactus, and that's the problem. And he finally reveals his luminous, prickly foliage to the audience when he, at last, takes a bath on stage. As we might expect from satire, concepts are taken to their limits, in this case to the absurd. While the opera asks the audience to contemplate interspecies, not to mention interplanetary congress, we come to sympathize with Andrei, who's forced to conceal his identity from a society that dictates conformity and submission. On a symbolic level, the outrageous circumstances of the story become a dark expose of the alienation of the individual and other themes of psychological trauma in totalitarian society. Now, my PKHENTZ is an progress work, and as such I'm not able to play any of the music for you today. I am working towards a production with several collaborators, including 2 Amherst alumni seated in this room today. One is Emily Rosenberg, a brilliant and truly imaginative costume and stage designer. Collaborating with Emily continues to be one of the highlights of my life, and you'll get to see some of her work in just a few minutes. The other is Bill McGlory, a wonderful writer and connoisseur of literature, in collaboration with whom I adapted Sinyavsky's story into a libretto. We have all recently incorporated under the name Subliminal Opera, along with a collective of performers and theater designers. The company is committed to the production of new chamber opera in the Northeast. Andrei Sinyavsky, author of PKHENTZ, whose story Bill and I have adapted, stands as one of the most significant literary figures to emerge from Russia since the Second World War. Cold War readers in the West relished the alacrity with which Sinyavsky satirized contemporary social mores while pointing to larger existential questions of power, freedom, and the decline of traditional systems of value. Indeed, it would seem to have been Sinyavsky's popularity in the West, rather than the actual content of his writings, that soon brought about the attention of the KGB. In 1965, Sinyavsky was arrested in Moscow. He faced charges that ranged from pornography to treason. The author suffered a show trial, notable not only for its circus-like atmosphere. The courtroom cheered when Sinyavsky's verdict of guilty was read, but also because it marked an end to an era of cultural thaw that followed in the wake of Stalin's death in 1953. Sinyavsky received a maximum sentence of 7 years of hard labor in the Gulag of Mordovia, some 300 miles east of Moscow. Curiously, when Sinyavsky was asked to make a final statement at his trial, he chose to recite a line from memory taken from the internal monologue of Andrei Kazimirovich, his eccentric, spiny vegetable hero from PKHENTZ. Sinyavsky said, "Just think, if I am different from others, they immediately start to swear at me. Well, I am different." It seems telling that at this crucial moment, when Andrei Sinyavsky was under the greatest pressure to conform and repent, he chose instead to align himself with another Andrei, an outlandish social misfit, an alien, and a cactus hiding in Moscow. I'm not able to play any of the music from PKHENTZ this afternoon, but I'd like to describe just a little bit of what it will sound like. In the opera, the frequent sound-based exclamations of Andrei the Cactus are of particular musical interest. Loitering beneath a running drain pipe, drops of water quench Andrei's thorny, parched neck. He moans in satisfaction. "Ooh, nice down below. Oh, Veronica, Veronica. Ooh, cool, delicious." In the score, passages such as these present a fertile opportunity to explore the more extended features of the human voice. Here the singers oohs and ahs will melodically imitate the grotesque contortions of the accompanying instruments with an intoxicated giddiness. Occasional lapses into such atmospheric writing will create a satisfying contrast to frequent frenetic episodes. These are often instigated by Veronica. For example, at the end of Scene 2, in the last-ditched attempt to satisfy her sexual needs, Veronica, and these are Sinyavsky's words, catapults onto the bed and thrashes like a fish out of water. The boisterous orgy of stratified melodies and musical sirens that animates Veronica's writhing should place the listener somewhere between a Dixieland jazz set on double time and a front row seat at the Sputnik launch. Another substantial feature of the score takes its inspiration from the abundant extraterrestrial imagery found in the libretto, or more precisely, Andrei's extraterrestrial descriptions of earthly imagery. He's the alien. As Andrei begins to reveal his otherworldly origins during the bath scene, he recounts his profound sense of estrangement caused by the Earth's atmospheric conditions in the days of the crash. He sings, "The air was wrong, the light was wrong, the gravity was unfamiliar. a moon was burning in the sky, huge and yellow, but just one moon. This passage in particular invites us to contemplate the overwhelming feeling of alienation one would experience on an entirely foreign planetary surface. In order to invest a degree of this disorienting sensation into the score, I devised a texture of vast sound clouds, slowly evolving masses of sustained or subtly oscillating pitches in the ensemble that on occasion dramatically shift in register and volume. The clouds waft among Andrei's vivid descriptions of Earth from a visitor's perspective as he disrobes for his family. Curiously, my second opera, STRIP-TEASE, actually culminates in another disrobing. A word about the genesis of this work. Let us fast forward 6 years from that first composition lesson I had with Scrabble. I'm now sitting in the office of Professor Marta Kraczynska at the University of Chicago. Marta Kraczynska is one of Poland's leading composers, and almost certainly Poland's leading composer of opera. For example, her opera, Pan Marimba, has been performed 114 times. At my lesson, Marta says to me, "So, Dylan, it's time for you to write your dissertation composition. What would you like to compose?" Not unlike the scene at my lesson with Lou Spremlin, I took a moment. I thought about my degree in music and English. I thought about how much I loved writing and producing my opera here at the college, and so forth. So I said to Marta, "Marta, I'd like to write an opera." "Great," Marta said. "What will your opera be about?" This time I had an answer. I told her I'd been adapting a superb Russian story about a hunchbacked cactus who cannot love called PKHENTZ. And this is what I would like to do as my dissertation. To my surprise, Marta said, "No." No. Take a look at the Polish playwright Sławomir Mrożek. So off I went to Regenstein Library. I found a collection of 3 plays by Mrożek, and this time I didn't even have to open the book. I saw the title STRIP-TEASE on the spine of the volume, and I knew this is my opera. But just to be sure, I did read the play. In STRIP-TEASE, both play and opera, a pair of office workers, Mr. A and Mr. B, find themselves detained for unknown reasons in an empty room. Instead of escaping through the unlocked doors, the men quarrel about whether or not they are truly free to leave. Soon, however, it is too late. The doors close and lock, and in comes a man-sized hand. The hand subjects Mr. A and Mr. B to humiliating punishments, including disrobing. As a second hand impinges upon the scene, the men are anointed with comical cardboard hoods, dunce caps. Their curtain falls as the men follow the second hand off stage for an implicit execution. The play STRIP-TEASE premiered in Poland in 1961. Comical and, yes, absurd on its surface, the story is ultimately a dark condemnation of the infringements upon human dignity at the hands, quite literally, of oppressive government forces. At the time, the Polish People's Republic was, for most intents and purposes, a satellite of the Soviet Union. This is, of course, a complex chapter in political history, and I am by no means an expert in this subject. But for our purposes today, I think it is permissible to think of Poland in the 1960s as part of the long arm of the Soviet Union. And in this regard, we can begin to see some parallels in the lives of both Sinyavsky and Mrożek, each taking substantial literary risks, despite the severe attitude the government took towards artistic works that did not conform to the official doctrine of socialist realism. Now, before I describe in greater detail my own artistic motivations for transforming Mrożek's play into an opera, you might like to know a little bit more about the author whose works inspired this project. According to several scholars, Sławomir Mrożek, who passed away only in 2013, stood as the most significant playwright to emerge from Poland in the second half of the 20th century. Already by 1969, the critic Martin Eslin, who is widely remembered in the discourse of dramatic criticism for coining the term theater of the absurd, suggested that among many avant-garde writers to come to prominence in post-war Eastern Europe, Rozek is undoubtedly the most considerable in his achievement to date. And in her recent biographical and critical account of the author's career, Rozek's scholar, Helena Stephen, explains how Rozek stood as one of Poland's most significant and widely performed dramatists, whose plays and short stories published in Poland between 1957 and 1963 appealed to such a wide audience that the phrases "straight from Rozek" or "Rozek himself could not have invented that" were commonly used to describe real-life situations. And while Rozek enjoyed the status of literary celebrity in his native Poland, most of his works have been embraced by the international stage as well. Stephen remarks the significance of Rozek's boldly irreverent style, particularly in light of the severe limitations placed on writers of the Eastern Bloc, appealed to a Western audience. She says Rozek's original attractiveness in the West had come from his appearance as an absurdist writer from an isolated society that seemed to have lost all sense of humor under an oppressive regime. Indeed, one might identify Rozek's early international popularity as critical to the writer's enduring success. Following his bold letter of protest against the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, many of Rozek's works fell under a ban in Poland and other Soviet satellite states in the years that followed. During this time, Rozek supported himself largely through performances of his works in the West, and indeed, for much of his life, Rozek lived as an expatriate, which included extended sojourns in Italy, France, West Berlin, and it culminated in the author's move to Mexico. For me, one of the most attractive aspects of writing striptease was its intimacy, and not the one implied by the title. Striptease is scored for only 14 musicians, which makes it a chamber opera. In contrast to grand opera on the order of Wagner or Verdi, whose scores demand a veritable army of singers, instrumentalists, and stage engineers, the relatively modest forces called upon by my piece embrace a different aesthetic, one that favors tight-knit interactions among the musicians, spotlighting not only the singers, but also the instrumentalists as soloists at various times in the score. And my opera received its premiere in 2013 as part of the inaugural season of the University of Chicago's Logan Center for the Arts, and the performance combined the forces of the Grammy Award-winning ensembles Eighth Blackbird and the Pacifica String Quartet, and 3 outstanding singers, including Polish jazz sensation Grażyna Agusik and a violin accordionist. Now, invocations of the fantastic, the grotesque, even the lurid, are no strangers to the operatic stage. Indeed, composers of opera have long looked to these very elements for the theatrical and musical impetus for their work. In the Act II finale of Lorenzo da Ponte's libretto for Mozart's Don Giovanni, for example, lascivious rape meets his doom in the form of the stone-cold hands of the commendatore's statue. Animated by Mozart's jarringly dissonant progressions, this uncanny twist becomes an opportunity for the composer to flirt with the outer limits of 18th century tonal conventions. And in the 20th century, the theater of the absurd has been embraced by a number of prominent composers. For example, the Hungarian avant-garde composer George Ligeti wrote only one opera, Le Grand Macabre, which he adapted in 1977 from an absurdist play by Michel de Gelderode. The opera is set on the eve of the apocalypse. The story follows Necro-Tsar, Prince of Hell, on his anarchic exploits of drunks, miscreants, and the sheepishly bourgeois. So there's that one. Then there's Life with an Idiot, a 1993 opera by Russian composer Alfred Schnittke. It begins with an all too Rozekian twist. The authorities have sentenced the protagonist, known throughout as I, to spend the remainder of his days as the housemate of an idiot. As I's life falls victim to the idiot's tantrums, one of which results in the destruction of his wife's prized collection of the complete works of Marcel Proust, choruses, waltzes, and tangos accompany I's degeneration into an idiocy of his own. In this regard, we might like to view STRIP-TEASE, which is a darker but by no means less exuberant parable, as part of a tradition in contemporary opera that seeks to instill a sense of ethical awareness by satirizing our own social and moral shortcomings, often by means of an absurd premise. And at this point, I think we should watch STRIP-TEASE. And I'll take some questions if you have them afterwards. And I want to thank Professor Rabinowitz once again for the wonderful invitation to be here. And let's roll it.
Fantastic! Incredible! I was walking along as usual, not a care in the world, when suddenly, like a bolt from the sky, how did you get here? Why don't you ask what brought me here? Who brought me? Outrageous, preposterous. I was simply walking, or perhaps rather hurrying along. Yes, that's right, heading for a certain destination. It's obvious. I was walking along too, or rather hurrying along, heading for my certain destination. Words enough. I was bound on my course. Of course, you said yourself. Exactly, with conscious intent. With full conscious intent. Obeying the dictates of your conscience, motivated by faith and reason. Did they beat you? Oh no! And you, God forbid! I mean, I don't know anything. That's all I can say. What was it then? That's hard to tell. It was like a gigantic elephant. I see crowds. First it was like a flood, then a picnic. But in such a fog. It's true, it's so foggy today. You can hardly see a thing. Still, I was trying to reach my certain destination, which you yourself had freely chosen. That's God's honest truth. Did you hear a voice? I certainly did. There was a voice. Something like a song. Yes, of wine. Wine. Yes, but a little more staccato. Wine. A gigantic buzzsaw. But where the hell could a saw come from? I don't know. Perhaps it wasn't a saw, but something threw me to the ground. Me too. Well, I'll never make it there on time anymore. Here's an idea. Let's leave right now, as though nothing happened. No! Are you afraid? I'm afraid. Just a little nervous. I couldn't see. Because of the fog. They say we must not leave The situation will resolve itself. But why? Perhaps we can leave this room unimpeded and continue on our way. Perhaps we are led astray. Let's drop the subject. Let's not leave this room. If you're so sure about it, definitely we must use sound reasoning in dealing with this matter. Perhaps you're right. There's no one. There's no cause for concern. No obvious cause. Do you imply there is a cause? An obscure one. Let's establish the facts. All right, go on. This much is certain. We were helpless in the face of the phenomenon, and partly of our own will, and partly due to external pressures, we happened to find ourselves in these strange quarters. Fortunately, we found the doors open, but needless to say, our original intentions have thus been completely arrested. I fully agree. What are your conclusions? That is just what I was coming to. Our main task now is to preserve our calm and our dignity. After all, our freedom is in no way limited. You call this freedom, our sitting here? We can walk out any moment. The doors are open. Let's go, we waste time. What? What's that? I told you we should go. Right now? Are you afraid? Not at all. Then let's be free while there's still time. No! If I leave now, I will not be free. What do you mean? I'll tell you. What is freedom? What is freedom? It's the capacity to choose. While I'm seated here, knowing I can look out this door, I am free, loving and to see. That's how I know I'm free. But when I get up and walk through that door, I have made my choice and I've lost my freedom. I become the slave of my own And this makes you feel comfortable? Perfectly comfortable. Unlimited inner freedom is my answer to these strange happenings. What are you doing? I'm leaving. I don't like this. Surely you jest. Surely I do not. I believe in external freedom. And what about me? We should have made up our minds right away. You don't have to blame me. If you existed, the doors would not close. They'd open up right now. Be quiet. Why should I be quiet? Oh, just a feeling. What? Do me a favor, sit down. You think it may get worse? I'll try to knock on the wall. Won't you give me a hand? I'd rather read the papers in my briefcase or remember last year's horse races. It's always the first thing they do. Take away your shoelaces and belts. What for? So you can't hang yourself. This is a good sign. If the dear hand doesn't want us to hang ourselves, this means it wants to keep us alive. Coming, coming.
Oh, very good to see you again. Me too. They sure have an interesting way of doing things around here. Oh no! May I please keep my trousers? Excellent. I won't protest.
There is only one thing we can do now. What? Apologize to the hand. Apologize? I cannot do that. Do as you please. In any case, I am going to apologize.
I think it's coming again. If only we had some flowers. All right, you start.
Dear hand. I mean, dear and most honorable hand. Although well aware of the fact that the hand isn't here to listen to us, we still beg permission to speak to the hand from the heart. I mean, expressing myself poorly, but I simply wish to apologize for having been, for being, begging forgiveness from the depth of my heart, for whatever the hand knows that we don't know. For how are we to know what there is to be known? Therefore, whatever the case may be, I humbly apologize. I beg the hand's forgiveness. Please forgive us. I kiss the hand. There, look. Another one. They always come in pairs. It's calling to us. Should we go? It's calling to It's so dark. When you're called, you have to go.
The briefcases! We forgot our briefcases!
Right, my briefcase. Where's my briefcase?
Thank you so much for coming and for watching my opera. And are there any questions? Okay, yes, Ron.
Did you direct it?
Yeah, I did. One of the reasons that I chose this subject, or the piece, was that it could be staged somewhat minimally, and I guess that's kind of why I felt like I could handle the directions. But there's lots of stage directions, very specific stage directions in the play that were just perfect, to use in the opera as well. So, yeah.
Hi. In the original piece, how did the hand communicate with Mr. A and Mr. B? Or why did you choose to communicate in that way?
In the play, you mean, like, how was the hand communicating with them?
Well, in
the story.
In the original.
Yes, in the original. Yeah, that's. I'm glad you asked this. In the original play, Mrozek describes this hand as being a pointed hand, kind of like the classic printer's symbol, and the hand. It's done in all kinds of different ways. How this, what you do about the hand, and it's always a project for the stage designer to figure out how are we going to make a man-sized hand? What's it going to do? But in the original play, yeah, it's a pointed pointed hand, it kind of just points to the men. And importantly, it's really the men who interpret this gesture as, you know, something's pointing at me, I don't know what to do, I should probably humiliate myself because I'm in a desperate situation, and it goes downhill from there. But, you know, I wanted to have the hand have a voice, and in my piece, and there's this Katarzyna Agusek, who's a big jazz sensation, particularly in Poland, and it just kind of seemed right to work with her in this piece. And so we decided to kind of update the story a little bit. We made a woman's hand, and you know, we had this gesture. Instead of the pointing, the hand can kind of gesture this way, but still it's the men who are interpreting this gesture as ordered to script, because you know, she sings in incomprehensible dialect. She doesn't say any words, so that part is preserved. Yes?
Then what struck me, really, when I heard this piece in December was the instrumentation, the scoring of it, and how original and exciting it was. I mean, you spoke before, perhaps in your discussion of PKHENTZ, how you were going to use instruments as either voices or characters. Could you just briefly explain some of the choices you made and your theory behind the way the piece is scored?
Yeah, it's a big question. I'm happy with how the scoring turned out. One of the primary things that I've learned to do in opera, because I've had some good opera teachers, really, is you know, whatever you do, don't cover up the singers with music that's too loud or too high in register. And when that happens, you know, you lose the dialogue. So I think that was the thing I was obsessing about in writing this piece, making sure that when they're singing, there's not too much going on in the ensemble that's going to overwhelm them. And I also, I guess, just like the style of opera when it's mostly singing. There's not a lot of long instrumental interludes. When I watch operas that have long instrumental interludes, usually those are the moments that I'm, you know, okay, kind of waiting for the singer to sing again. So in this piece, I really wanted to have it be a very fast pace. And that kind of meant writing ensemble music that were these kind of interjections that would kind of punctuate the dialogue and keep the momentum moving forward. As far as instrumentation, I was kind of given this ensemble. This is my dissertation, and you know, for our dissertations, we get to combine Eighth Blackbird, which is a piano ensemble, clarinet, violin, cello, piano, and percussion, with a Pacifica string quartet. So that's 10, and then we can hire 4 additional musicians. So I have 3 singers. And I chose to include an accordion, a Bayan accordion, which is, you know, a fantastic Russian instrument. I think I saw one in the other room. Right. And you know, that was a way for me to get some, get a bit of a Slavic sound in there. It's an instrument that is actually truly very popular in Poland as well. You don't see it too much in the U.S. There are a few kind of prominent players, and one of them happened to be in Chicago, and lives in Chicago, and works with our series quite a bit. So that's a brief answer about the scoring.
Was the hand's music fully notated, or was she doing some improvisation?
She's doing almost entirely improvisation, which was sort of how she works. She's a jazz singer, improviser, and doesn't, you know, isn't going to do well faced with a big complex score. So in her passages in the score, they look quite different than most of the opera, and that was a nice challenge for me to kind of come up with a way to incorporate somebody who, you know, doesn't really work with the kind of notation that I'm used to notating into a piece. And I'm happy with how it turned out. You know, a lot of what she does is really kind of her own imagination. I'm
consider exactly the point of freedom. You know, this thing about freedom. And I was thinking that the way you scored the music, the way the music sounds, you know, it sounds like they couldn't resist. There's something irresistible about what was going on around them. And is that something that you're thinking about, how to make music that seemed almost irresistible to them, that they couldn't resist?
That they couldn't, that they wanted to stay there, and that's why they didn't leave the room, because there's all this music going on.
No, the way the music sounds, it sounds like you can't.
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that other than, I was trying to write music of, entrapment and enchantment, and, there's this mysterious magical hand coming soon enough, and I think there's this kind of momentum in the piece that kind of keeps them chatting with each other, arguing instead of staring at those open doors. I don't know what would have happened if they would have walked up the doors. I don't know if the hands were waiting there, or maybe not. Maybe we could just walk the doors. Yes, right.
Sort of on the same point, one of the things that maybe seems seductive about the Freedom song and later when they're fully stripped and all their absurdity is it's the most dance-like music, and it sort of seems to have a kind of vernacular to it, although kind of a hard one to identify. Was there any music you were listening to or trying to bring in?
There is this, I'd say the real strip-tease sequence when they're taking off their trousers, and that has a slight Latin groove to it, and I am not being too specific in what kind of Latin music I was influenced by. It's just my impression of I don't know why it happened to be Latin. I don't really have a good solid reason for that, but it's light-hearted, kind of comic, strip-tease music. And I think part of what I was trying to do in the piece was to have this kind of back and forth between, absurd comedy and dark, jarring kinds of music, which I felt kind of was the way to create a musical analog of Murchak's play. And there are these arias. I wanted to write an opera that did have a couple of arias, and I love arias in operas. And a lot of operas written in the 20th century don't have many just kind of set arias. It's kind of all kind of one continuous developing song-like style. But I'm glad I included the arias.
Let us continue this before we give you a big hand.
Such a treat to come back to campus.
Bill, who played the hand in the opera, if you know this,
Yes.
he featured in another role. He will use his hand to accept any money you'd like to buy the CD. Come and look at this little exhibit, but please come into the gallery for some wine, drink, and a small reception, at which point we can speak further to Dylan. Dylan, I just want to say how wonderful and exciting this was, and how truly appreciative we are of how you combined your musical gifts and the music major here and your superb articulateness as an English major. I think it's quite wonderful. Thank you very much, and best of luck to you, Dylan.
I'm going to the reception.
Good reason.
I'm going to say hi.